Thank you. Thanks for that wonderful introduction. And thanks for JP for setting the scene, I think, for what will be a great discussion. So we have about 40 minutes and we've got a lot to cover, so let's jump right in. And what I might do is, if our panellists don't mind, if you'd like to just introduce yourselves, the role that you play, and then if you could just tell us a little bit about how your agency is rethinking IT modernisation, or where you are on the journey, that quote that everyone likes to talk about, where you are on the digital transformation journey, but give us a little bit of context would be great. So maybe we'll start with you, David.
Great. So I'm David Brunton. When I accepted this invitation, I was the Chief of Platform Services in the Office of the Chief Information Officer, and I am now on my second day in a new job working for the Register of Copyrights, but in a similar role. I think the digital transformation and the IT modernization we sort of joked about this on the conference call as we were talking about it. I think it has a longer history than we sometimes think about. And when I talk to people at the library about it, I talk about how we are 50 years in to a 100-year-long modernization effort. The Library of Congress got its first mainframe computer in 1968, and it was used mostly for billing purposes, but by 1969, 50 years ago, it was being used for core parts of the business. The catalog records of books were beginning to be entered into the computerized system. And so I think, as we talk about it, I think one of the things that I said on our call, and that I think is that the wave of modernization that we're going through now, that has more emphasis on cloud computing, more emphasis on using infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service, that there are a lot of lessons to be learned from previous waves of IT modernization. I sort of cut my own teeth in the beginning of the web when it was just when we were beginning in the mid-90s to move systems off of PCs and mainframes onto the web. And I think, I'll actually pass that over to Guy, because he has an amusing anecdote about repurposing a previous talk about modernization. So.
Sure. Well, thank you. I'm Guy Cavallo. I'm the Deputy CIO at SBA, and along with Maria Rote, for the last 3 years, we have totally transformed the way SBA is. We both took the jobs at SBA knowing that its reputation was that it was one of the worst IT organizations in government. There are all types of GAO and IG findings, including a finding that they believed the agency was at serious risk due to its lack of IT management. So the topic today, to make this journey, you absolutely need to have the right management, the right leadership that are willing to stick their necks out to change things. Maria and I go 100 miles an hour. Some of our staff has caught on to that after 3 years. Some of them are still trying to grab on to the end. What we've challenged is we need to change everything. And if you haven't done this, I highly recommend, we took our development team and we asked them to go out to our website and pretend that they were a small business or a homeowner applying for a loan and see what the user experience was, both through their computer, and then we asked them to do it on their smartphone. My development ops manager, after an hour, came running down the hall, told me and said, "I can't believe we're making people do this." So looking at everything that your agency does from the citizen standpoint is critical. And one of the big changes we're doing right now is one of the few IT employees who's even older than me that's still there, wrote 2 separate identity management solutions for our citizens. Now, both of those solutions are custom grown. He's the only one that knows what's in the middle of them, and he's been eligible to retire for 5 years. What we've decided to do, and if you're not aware of it, GSA has an incredible program called login.gov, where instead of having one person at SBA who can leave any day being responsible for our citizens' identity, we're turning it over to GSA, and we've joined in and partnered with them to move to login.gov so that if somebody applies for a women's small business loan, but then realizes they also could have applied as a veteran, we actually make them start over and enter everything they've entered again, as if they've never dealt with SBA. With login.gov, which we're renaming as SBA Connect, what we're going to have is one common interface that's supported by more than one person, that passes all of our IG audits, and will be a common experience across SBA. And if other agencies join in on this, if they create an account with us and they go to your agency, they'll have all their content in there. So just looking at getting out of one business that we were in that we never should have been in. SBA is not an expert in authentication, especially with one person. And getting out of that and changing the user experience makes a tremendous difference for the citizens, but also from us for a cyber end.
My name is Megan Furman. I am the Deputy Director for the Defense Digital Service. DDS is a SWAT team of nerds that works in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, and we work on everything from technology procurement reform to consulting on complex acquisitions themselves to running projects. And when we run those projects, our goal is to bring modern technology practices, modern design and user-centered design practices, and run our projects, build capacity with that as a starting point. When I think about where we are today, the way that you acquire an aircraft carrier and the way you want to acquire software or enterprise software, not really the same. You think about the time horizons there, and you actually may have, defined a solution that exists today that didn't exist 2 months ago, but is in fact excellent and secure. And so as we think about moving forward from where we are today, it is making better decisions and then also starting to adapt the policy so that there's space to make those decisions. Some of what DDS has worked on in the past, it includes everything from cloud migrations to bug bounties. So we actually, and I think this is an instructive example as you think about either moving to the cloud or changing your technology practices, bug bounties. In 2017, the federal government had never done a bug bounty. That's something that the private sector has been doing for years. And when I say a bug bounty, what I mean is security researchers, either vetted or unvetted, where you give them a scope and you say, okay, look at this, show me what might be wrong, report bugs. Like literally there's a bounty, most critical vulnerabilities down, and sometimes they're paid, sometimes they're not. But we started running those bug bounties. It was a very kind of scary thing for the Department of Defense to say, we are inviting security researchers, we're inviting hackers to come and poke at our systems and see what they find. And what we found is that, yeah, we have vulnerabilities, but when we know about them, we can remediate them, and that is incredibly important. And so as we think about moving through the journey, it's finding the space to do something that's a little bit aggressive, a little bit scary, making that really, really successful, and then driving a Mack truck through it.
I'm Chris Tonjes, and I'm the CIO for the DC Office of the Attorney General. So I'm a little bit of an outlier here, I think. I'm the only person on this panel that's a state government person. The Attorney General is an elected position in DC, and as such, our office is evolving. The functions that we perform are what you would expect an Attorney General to do. We prosecute some crimes. We vigorously advocate for child abuse cases. We enforce child support orders. We defend the district government in lawsuits that people might file against us, and we have an extremely aggressive consumer protection program. But we're changing, and we're changing really fast. The Attorney General and the Chief Deputy Attorney General came from the world of private law firms. They are not sympathetic to the slow speed of government processes. They are not sympathetic to me when I tell them that something is going to take a long time. So we move at a much faster pace than my DC government colleagues and some of my government colleagues in general. I would submit that transformation is always going on. It's never really over. You start with one place, you move to another place, in 2 or 3 years you're in a completely different place from that. To that end, we're doing almost everything all at once, unfortunately, and that includes modernizing our infrastructure, taking the core systems that our lawyers use to manage their work and modernizing them, and then taking a 40-year-old legacy system that has pieces that might be actually almost 50 years old, and modernizing that. When we embark on a modernization project, we want to do fastest, the least risky, and the least expensive approach. What does that mean? In the case of our biggest legacy modernization project, we are not building it from scratch. We are not using a system that another state built and carrying it forward with all of its inherent design flaws and compromises. We take platforms, cloud-based platforms that we understand and work well in different business contexts, and try to find a way to stitch them together and apply them to other business contexts. So that's an approach that is evolving and that's working well for us. And I think that is a good approach when one approaches digital transformation.
So Chris, just as a follow-up, as you think about the tools and the technology that you have deployed, how has it transformed the way you use the data to guide you to make the right business decisions and to get the right outcomes?
That's a good question. In one case, our enterprise cloud management platform can be used to collect data, and that data can also be used to either invoke a process or flag further action by some of our staff. So I listened very eagerly and very interestingly to JP's description of the future of work. Some of those things we're actually trying to do. We harvest metadata. That data kicks off a process. We use AI to validate documents that are presented to us rather than having a person do that. And then at home, I use a Roomba to vacuum, so that's the future of homework.
That makes sense. Megan, in your environment?
I think one of the things that is a challenge, certainly in the DoD, but I think everywhere, is how do you make your data accessible? And as you end up with so many different silos, that migration towards the cloud is an excellent time to be able to look and say, okay, how could we maybe make a different decision here? Because kind of as JP said, you don't want to just do a lift and shift. You also need to think about what are the processes that you're actually trying to enable down the road, making a plan for the future, and then aiming at that. So you're not just copying what someone does today, you're actually saying, how could we change our whole workflow? Like if I don't have to sit down and, like in your case, say, yes, this is the right document, I can use an AI for that. What do I do with the extra time I get back? And that is such a powerful thing that I think for DoD, we've been thinking about how do we transform the data as we move so that migration happens kind of organically, and then take that data, because right now, it's really ugly. The ugly data then isn't available, it's not useful if it's not managed correctly, if you're not reading the metadata, if you're not storing the metadata. And so just starting to make those little incremental changes has been really impactful.
To get more insights out of all this data that you're collecting.
So right now it just sits in little buckets, and someone, I know what's in which bucket, but
the person next to you doesn't.
The person next to me doesn't. I would like a bot master myself to organize my piles. And something that we spend a lot of time doing is saying, okay, how do you even figure out where all the piles are? Lost on a server in a closet that now needs to be migrated to the cloud.
Yeah, makes sense. And Guy, in your environment?
I'd say the biggest impact that I've seen really in my entire career is what we've done in the last year with our cybersecurity data and the power of the cloud. If you haven't followed SBA, again, we moved quickly. We built our first cloud in 82 days with 2 federal employees. Then the next year, we did a pilot with DHS on TIC modernization, and I did that with 5 federal employees. And then we just completed a pilot with DHS on a cloud alternative to the CDM program. I think maybe I brought in 7 federal employees. So what we've done is we're taking every device in SBA that generates a log, and we're throwing it in the cloud. We're letting the cloud use artificial intelligence to merge all that data, and instead of having people staring at screens trying to map something from the upper left corner to the bottom right corner, we're having the AI tell us, hey, you are being attacked from Nigeria right now, because we see this here, we see this here, and we see this here. It has revolutionized the way we do cyber. Before we turned this on, we used to report maybe 10 malicious websites a year to CERT from the phishing expeditions. Now we're bringing down over 200 websites a month that not only helps SBA, but it helps all the all federal government, state and local government, and US citizens. So, I mean, that impact is very, very night and day as far as having access to that data and utilizing it.
And Guy, how long did it take you to transition to that new model?
90 days.
90 days, that's incredible. Wow, that's a great story. And David, for the Library of Congress?
Riffing off of something that Megan said, the Library of Congress has cared a lot about metadata for a long time. This has been fully 200 years, but the profession for a long time before that. And I think the interesting thing in terms of systems work and in terms of how much lift we get from machine learning, really the big advantages for instrumenting the process come at scale. And the scale that the scale of keeping track of one Gutenberg Bible on vellum in a big case on display is very different than the scale of keeping track of 100 million voluntary copyright deposits, or of keeping track of 20 petabytes of digitized movies, or keeping track of 15 million papers that are there sort of for the public. I think at the Library of Congress, one of the key challenges we have is that user-centered approach, which has been really foundational to libraries for a long time, is a perfect approach for all of the collections, but the approach to business data, things like procurement data, things like security data, things like usernames and passwords, requires broadening of how we think of a user. So at a library, we think of our user as, when you say user, what most people think of as a researcher or a patron. But the researcher or the patron is not the primary user of the Kibana dashboard that tells you how much storage space you have left on a particular storage device, that kind of thing. And so I think part of the approach that we've had to take is beginning to educate the staff to understand in a given context who the user is, and to sort of treat them as a first order customer, even if they're not the sort of end customer of the library. It might be the person sitting in the cube next to you, but it still requires a user-centric approach, and the sort of same user-centric approach that we've brought to the patrons. And in fact, at the Library of Congress, our very first and foremost user is the Congress, the members of Congress. And the approach that we've tried to take in terms of thinking about how to serve users is trying to think about each user as being that important, as each user getting sort of that level of service that we would think of when we think about the way that we serve a member of Congress.
And so if I take that sort of a step further, if we think about the employee, so as JP talked about, the human being and the employee, how has all of the sort of digital transformation, modernization, changed the way that they work, they collaborate? Have you started to see numerous examples of productivity gains, a change in the way they think about their career and the roles that they perform? So maybe, Megan, if I can start with you. So what has this technology change done for your employees?
That's a really interesting question, because it picks up on who is our customer and who is our employee. I think one of the things that we see as a challenge right now is, in the government, people have been used to procuring, bare metal hardware and running their own data centers and running their own IT and sometimes shoving a server in a closet without proper ventilation, and you hope they patched it. And so as you move to the cloud, and I know you know what I'm talking about, and you're like, how is there a server in this closet? There's no ventilation, and it definitely hasn't been patched. As you think about going from that to migrating to the cloud, people are comfortable with the concept of a server, even if it is not the right one for them. And so one of the places that we've made a lot of strides, and I think there's still space to go, is how do you, as a government organization, take advantage of the flexibility of the cloud, procure cloud effectively, and then take advantage of things like spinning up more capability when you need it, and then spinning that capability down when you don't, and taking advantage of those cost savings. And so I think right now we're actually just at the cusp of doing that well. And so when I think about where we've seen productivity gains so far, it is in starting to get people comfortable with technology, getting folks using, big, genuinely enterprise systems to collaborate and to communicate, and bouncing off of commercial solutions so that we're not building them in-house, as you talked about, and then someone retires and you're like, oh no, what happened to my system? So being able to take advantage of pieces that are existent today, move faster, and then as we look to the future, be able to take advantage of those cost savings that come with really being able to use cloud in a first-class way.
And have you seen changes in the way they physically work? I mean, in our industry and technology, Agile really did change the way people came together in pods. Have you seen something similar?
Yes and no. It really depends on the organization. I think that, within our office, my office is composed mostly of people who are all government employees now, but came from the private sector. Your Googles, your Facebooks, and are world-class engineers in that sense. And so for them, it's actually really fascinating. I showed up day one and was handed a MacBook, and people said, we put security settings on here, but we trust you. We know that you are a professional who does this for a living. Go forth and prosper. And we have Slack, and we have Google, and we've been able to work with other organizations to say, do you need reasonable communication systems to be able to, when you work remotely, have a chat client that actually works for you and integrates with your workflow. And so what we've seen is people actually being able to, take advantage of remote work in ways that let them live happier, healthier, more fulfilled lives. And I think that is really, really important within our own office. When I look out to the field, to the warfighter that we support, being able to have modern technology is tremendously important. The biometric enrollment devices that soldiers use in Afghanistan right now are the same devices that they have been using since 2002. And that is crazy. Right now, I unlock my iPhone with my face. And we still have people, putting things on physical ice buckets trying to make sure that it stays cool enough without enough storage space. That's ridiculous. The thing we need to do now is take the innovations we have, managed here at sort of the center and push them out, because, it takes time to transition, but 2002 technology does not serve the battlefield at the end of the day.
Yeah, that makes sense. Chris, in the Office of the Attorney General?
So we've seen some really, really dramatic improvements in productivity, and we've seen some changes, and you'll probably laugh when I tell you what these changes are. Before I was hired, the way we shared information with other lawyers was either through FedEx in a disk or a thumb drive walked across the street. We don't do that anymore.
Oh, that's good.
We share things using the cloud, and that has been a sea change in the way we work with many of our courts and our other criminal justice and civil justice partners. The staff is gaining fluency and skills, additional digital literacy. There's an internal digital divide in our office, and it's not always what you would think. It's not always the young people who are the most digitally fluent and the old people who aren't, but we have a tremendous digital divide in our office, and that's something that I've taken on to try to remediate so that there's an even level of skills and that people can use all the tools that that we have. We've invested proportionally a large amount of money in new systems, new software, new things. When I first got to OAG, I think there were 15 cell phones from the entire agency and 2 iPads. We now have about 600 of those things. Almost everybody has a laptop. Almost everybody can work anywhere, and people can do things automatically that they used to have to do manually. The question is, what do we do with the extra time? And in our case, we provide additional services, or we do more work. So there's been a dramatic improvement that we can see, but we were starting off at a very, very, very low place. The practice of law is changing really quickly. We consider ourselves a law firm. If you measured us against any of the large law firms in DC, I think we'd be number 4 or number 5. We have 400 lawyers. We have 250 support staff, and that's growing. So we have to be able to keep up with our colleagues, some of whom are paid $1 million a year, as opposed to government lawyers that are paid $150,000. So it's essential that we keep arming our staff with the skills and the tools to compete, and we look for near-term, pragmatic, practical results from whatever we do in technology.
That makes sense. David, in the Library of Congress?
Boy, I think there's a lot of threads that have run through everything that everybody said, and it's all really resonated. I think as the Library of Congress has gone through its earlier Guy was mentioning GAO audits. So the Library of Congress is at the tail end of a big public GAO audit, which I would encourage you to read. If you haven't been audited by I'm sure all of you have been audited by your IG, but if you haven't been audited by the GAO, you should go read a GAO audit, because there are a lot of themes that go across the GAO audits. And one of the themes is about controls on the process. How much control do you have at various places? And it's easiest to instrument controls at an isthmus, where there's sort of a natural choke point. And this creates a pressure for centralization of certain functions. One of the things that has been most interesting at the Library of Congress is that as we've centralized the IT service operations and the software development lifecycle, one of the things that we've had to sort out is how many of the technical skills that were previously sort of lumped in with IT just because they were kind of similar in, they involve typing at a computer. How many of those skills really are necessary for the day-to-day operation of the business, and how many of those skills over time have been built up in the business. Mm-hmm. And there's really 2 big advantages in the centralized IT shop to watching that happen. One advantage is that it creates this sort of farm team of people who know the technology stacks, people who, and as you watch people in various parts of the organization learn and grow and become skilled in the toolkits, that becomes a labor pool that you can sort of attract talent into the IT side from. And then the second is that it begins to, when we talk about what do you do with the time savings, what do you do with the cost savings, in the case of the core operations of an IT shop and of a centralized IT shop in particular, the time-consuming work that we do of keeping systems up to date, keeping everything patched, keeping the software development lifecycle sort of running smoothly, instrumenting all of the controls around procurement, all the controls around access, all the controls around IT security, all the controls around the PMLC and the SDLC, all of the controls around selection of new technologies that need to be in place, and then sort of loosening up the ones that don't. One of the things that has proven advantageous as we've sort of started to navigate these new swim lanes of a centralized IT operation and a very technically savvy business operation is that not needing to lump in sort of in the old way of thinking about this, well, that's on a computer, send it to IT. Well, no, that's on a computer, but that's not the software development lifecycle. That's not related to IT security. That's really a business operation. If you're doing analytics, analytics doesn't have to be rooted in IT. It can be rooted in a business, even if the analytics system that you're using is being managed by your IT shop. And so I think that for us has been like a key lesson learned, is that there's this, as we've been undergoing this transformation where we move more of our operations to platform as a service, more of our operations to the cloud, more of our operations to really a more centralized IT management infrastructure, that we're growing in the technical skills to use these operations alongside the colleagues who are not even remotely in IT. I think Chris has probably this in spades, because lawyers are they're doing law all day, and they have to, well, at the Library of Congress we have really three key sets of people. One are librarians who are doing sort of things like cataloging public service all day. And then we have researchers at the Congressional Research Service who are really using the library services to prepare reports for the Congress. And then the copyright system, that sort of the heart of it is this registration of copyrights, people who are sort of feeding the beast. That's how the Library of Congress gets its collections, is through the Copyright Office. And that each of those professions, we're seeing a trend toward more and more technical skills that goes along with the centralization of IT, which I think wasn't what everybody expected, but has made everybody feel a lot more comfy about IT centralization, because they're beginning to realize, oh, that's not a threat to my job. The fact that I can't see the computer under the desk anymore isn't somebody trying to take something away from me.
And so as a follow-on to that, and I'll ask you, Guy, as you've sort of centralized and modernized with all of these new innovative modern technologies and innovation, what does that mean now in terms of security? Your data continues to grow as well, and security sort of is at the heart and soul of everything. And so as you think about it within your organizations, what steps are you taking to ensure now, as the data grows and as you're bringing in and developing a best-of-breed stack, that security is right at the center of everything? So maybe, Guy, we'll start there.
All right. I want a real quick answer about the employees. One thing, I think it's a crime if you have employees who have better productivity software at home than they do in the government. This is something that I've fought my entire career. I'm old enough that I remember having people bring in the original Apple computers to work on at their desk, because the mainframe computer didn't provide the data. So if you're not there, it's a crime. I mean, whatever your organization is, you need to have the most current productivity software available. What we've done is we've gone from emailing everybody in the world to turning on Yammer, because we're an Office 365 shop. And now, so then we got people to use Yammer and SharePoint instead of email. Now we're switching to Microsoft Teams, where we're seeing our end users put up communities of practice, share ideas across. I have 124 offices across the country. So we have people that do similar jobs on each coast that never see each other, but now they're sharing ideas. So that's critical. On the security part, we've given people more flexibility but tighter security. So for example, when Marie and I got to SBA, you only were allowed to have an Apple iPhone, and that was it. Yet again, I have offices all over, and you only could use one wireless vendor. I have offices across the country where that wireless vendor has no signal, but it didn't matter. Our predecessor says, you're going to have this device, even though you can't connect to anything, it's going to be there. So we brought in 3 wireless vendors, and we gave people the choice of 2 different manufacturers of phones, but we use the same security software. So now they're operating in a secure container, because we really don't care if they have an Android or an iPhone, or if they're on Verizon or AT&T or Sprint or whatever else. Whatever they need to communicate. So I think you can do that double thing of giving your users more flexibility and also meeting the conditions of where you are, especially with warfare stuff around the world.
Yeah.
You can't be guaranteed of any service wherever you are if you pick one vendor. But we still collect all that secure data. That same data from the cell phones goes to the same cloud that we now match against all of our cloud activities. And we're in multiple clouds. There is no single cloud. If there's a federal agency that's in a single cloud, it's probably one that's like 2 employees. I know we do have some agencies like that. We're in multiple clouds, but we're feeding all the cloud data into the one so that we're getting the log data of everything. So we've changed the way we work. On the federal side, as deputy, I get to be the heavy. I have 3 classes of employees. I have the ones that are like me and Maria, that something new was invented today and they can't wait to learn about it. Those are the easiest IT employees to manage. Then I have the ones in the middle that have been there for a while and not real happy with change, but at least they go along.
Yep.
And I don't understand how anybody picks this career if you don't like change. But we have lots of those. And then we have those that are hoping that everything will go away. And so I've done training. I personally hosted 4 months of training every week. I sent people to class. And if they didn't change, I used the personnel system to reward those that got on board and to punish those that didn't. And again, I can't understand how anyone pick IT. Go be an accountant if you don't like change. But you pick IT as a career.
No offense to accountants out there.
And I think all of us probably have seen it. Some of your biggest resistance to change are the IT professionals.
Yeah, that's so true. Megan, DDS security must be top of mind.
All the time. I think thinking about what you just said about sometimes your own people being the blocker, one of the things that people are very comfortable with in DoD is compliance-based security. Did I fill out all of my paperwork 100% correctly? Are there 400 pages of like short essay questions that answer all of my STIGs and controls? And what we've seen is that functionally that kind of compliance-based security is not effective because people bend the rules to get to where they need to go, or when you actually take a step back, you're not actually holistically thinking about, say, authentication, like we talked about earlier. And so when you take a step back and you say, how holistically am I thinking about my system security, I think that that is incredibly important. Migration to the cloud is a perfect time to institute new policies and new practices. If you're thinking about something like a zero trust security model, you can actually, as people make migrations, put in place those steps along the way that are going to make it that much easier in the future. Future proofing is incredibly important. You know, we are beholden to decisions people made 20 years ago. And those were the right decisions at the time, and they are the wrong decisions today. And so part of what we have to do is think about, you know, how do we start unwinding those decisions, and how do we not make those mistakes in the future? And then the final thing that I would say is I totally agree. The human side and the human hygiene side is so important. You know, you can secure a system till the cows come home, but if someone is writing down their password and sticking it on their monitor, if they use the same password across all of their devices and all of their systems, you know, you have a huge vulnerability, and no amount of system-oriented and IT-oriented solution is going to fix that. You have to lean into the training and the people side of things.
Yeah, that makes sense. Chris?
Yeah, I worry about this all the time. You know, we sit on top of all kinds of things that would be catastrophic if they got out into the general public. We went through a very arduous process of classifying our data based on what the data is. It either can or cannot be shared, or can be shared with certain people but not with other people, should live in one place and not another, should be protected in certain ways versus other ways. But that's kind of a moving target. A lot of the tools that we've implemented make that a bit easier than just dumb storage on a network, but nonetheless, it's a very, very difficult thing. Adding a security mindset to our users is particularly challenging. We have people that would email themselves documents to work on at home, and they'd email it to, their Yahoo personal email or their AOL personal email, things that had been compromised, and those documents were, client documents that they were working on. So we had people that were living really dangerously, and trying to reorient them has been a continuing challenge. I would agree with Megan. When you're moving to the cloud, or if you're part of a bigger whole and there are gaps in the things that you have to secure or the expectations in the way you secure them, that opens up some possibilities for you to eliminate risk, possibilities for you to do things a little bit differently, and possibilities for you to take control. So we've exploited that to the greatest degree that we can. We're governed by another IT agency, the central IT agency for the city, that has a security operations center, but they don't always monitor the things that we need them to monitor. So we found gaps. We're finding a way to fill them, finding a way to fill them with policies, finding a way to fill them with software, and finding a way to fill them with education.
That makes sense. And finally, David.
I think the security thing that I think we've done at the Library of Congress that has paid the most dividends probably in the past 5 years of a huge shift toward a security mindframe has been to, and this may sound like a small thing if you've already done it, but if you haven't, this would be my takeaway, is to centralize the authorizing official for the agency. So there's now at the Library of Congress a single authorizing official for all IT systems, and there's one view of all of the sort of IT systems and known poems, if you speak in poems. And I think that this is the area where IT centralization has yielded the most benefit and where we've had the most sort of audit findings that we can check off in large swaths has been to basically narrow down the number of people who can authorize an IT system to go live at the library.
And in the last couple of minutes, it's for all of you or any of you, since we have a room of peers and they've heard some great stories within your own organisations of some of the things you're doing, if there was one piece of advice that you would leave your colleagues, what would that be? I'll start with Chris.
Keep trying. Push as hard as you can. Some days are going to be better than others. And your team may have some 200 hitters. Give them assignments that they can do and focus on the people that can help you move faster.
Megan?
Keep pushing on the education of the organization and also of yourselves. Technology is moving and changing really quickly. If we don't lean into the change, then we are always going to be behind. And the best way to be prepared is to have a really deep technical understanding.
Fantastic. Guy?
If you don't have that executive leadership at the top, don't do this. I've had a number of agencies come to me where somebody will say, my CIO is not quite on the board with the cloud, but we really like what you're doing. And I said, okay, I have openings. If you want to come work for me, that's where you can do it, but you're not going to be successful there. And again, it's full leadership. Marie and I have put our necks on the line and been willing to be fired to lead this transformation. This isn't just a show up and launch a cake and then never be part of it again. You need that leadership at the top. And if you're interested, we host a cyber session every month for 3 hours where we show all of this. If you're a government employee, no vendors, please. guy.cavallo@sba.gov, and just email me and we'll invite you to the next session. We've had over 800 people come see what we're doing.
We'll make sure we share that information. Thank you, Guy. David, take us home.
Well, I already sort of said mine, but I'll go sideways and say, come visit the Library of Congress.
Yeah.
Tweet me at @dbrunton.
Awesome, wonderful. Please thank our wonderful panelists for their insights. Thank you, team. Back to the ladies. Thank you.
It's a new job.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, second day.
I love what you guys are doing, by the way. All right. That was so great. Thank you.